Imagine paying taxes your whole life. You work, you get your paycheck, the government takes its share, and you just accept that's how society works. Now imagine a group of bankers, traders, and lawyers figured out how to do something almost unbelievable. They convinced governments to hand them back billions in tax refunds for taxes that were never paid in the first place. Not millions, billions. This became known as the Cum-Ex scandal, and investigators described it as one of the biggest tax scams in European history. Investigative journalists at Corrective estimated the damage at 55 billion euros in the original Cum-Ex files, and later reporting pushed the broader estimate to 150 billion euros across related schemes. And the craziest part? This wasn't some underground cybercrime operation. This happened inside the financial system with banks, legal opinions, official paperwork, and people in suits. So in this video, I'll show you how the scam worked, why governments didn't stop it, who got rich, and why normal taxpayers were the ones who really paid for it. When people hear tax fraud, they usually picture someone hiding cash. That's not this. This scam was much more sophisticated. It used share trading around dividend dates to create confusion over who owned a stock at the exact moment a dividend tax credit could be claimed. Reuters describes the scheme as banks and investors rapidly trading shares around payout day, so that multiple parties could falsely reclaim tax rebates on the same dividend. And that is what makes this story so important, because this wasn't just theft. It was institutional theft. The kind that looks complicated enough that most people stop asking questions. And when ordinary people stop asking questions, people with money usually win. So what is Cum-Ex? Let's simplify it. A company pays a dividend to shareholders. Normally tax is withheld on that dividend. Then, if someone is entitled to a refund or credit, that refund goes to the rightful owner who actually bore the tax. Simple. But in the Cum-Ex scheme, traders moved shares around so quickly around the dividend date that it became unclear who really owned the shares at the key moment. On paper, it could look like more than one person had a claim linked to the same tax dividend. Reuters says the scheme blurred ownership and allowed multiple bogus rebate claims. The result? Multiple parties were able to claim refunds for a tax payment that had only happened once, or in some descriptions, for tax that was never genuinely borne by the people asking for the money back. Corrective summarizes it this way. Multiple players get reimbursed for a tax that was never paid, or only paid once. That is the entire scandal in one sentence. Multiple people got refunded for one tax payment. Imagine buying one concert ticket and photocopying it until 5 people get VIP access. That's basically the logic. Except here, the venue was the state, and the money came from taxpayers. What made this scam powerful was not just greed, it was complexity. Because if you rob a bank with a mask, everyone understands the crime. But if you move shares between banks, funds, brokers, and legal entities across borders, using settlement timing, dividend dates, and legal opinions, suddenly the crime starts to look like financial engineering. And that's where elites get protection. They can hide behind words like arbitrage, optimization, tax structuring, legal uncertainty. That's why some of the people involved insisted they were just exploiting loopholes. But prosecutors and courts increasingly treated it as fraud. Reuters reported that German prosecutors described players in the scheme as having misled the state into thinking a stock had multiple owners who were each owed a tax credit, and Germany has convicted several people connected to the scandal, including high-profile tax lawyer Hanno Berger. So this wasn't just clever finance. It was a system designed to extract public money by turning complexity into cover. And this is where the story gets darker. Because this wasn't one rogue genius. Investigations linked the trades to a whole ecosystem. Traders, bankers, lawyers, funds, tax experts, and institutions across multiple countries. Reuters reported that German investigations spanned around 1,500 suspects and 100 banks on 4 continents. Think about that. 100 banks. This wasn't a bug. It was an industry. And once you realize that, the story changes. Because then the real question becomes, how does something this huge continue for so long? And the answer is uncomfortable. Because the people doing it were exactly the kind of people society assumes are respectable. Not anonymous criminals, professionals, experts, people in expensive offices speaking technical language. That is what makes financial crime so dangerous. The more sophisticated it looks, the less likely the public is to react in time. So how much did this cost? A lot depends on which country and which estimate you use. The original Cum-Ex files investigation estimated 55 billion euros in losses across Europe. Later reporting from the same investigation pushed the broader estimate to 150 billion euros tied to related tax fraud structures. For Germany alone, Reuters reported expert estimates of around 10 billion euros in losses, while some officials previously cited lower state estimates such as 5.6 billion euros. Denmark pursued claims linked to billions as well. Reuters reported Danish tax authorities said they lost about $2 billion in earlier reporting, while later, Financial Times coverage described a major case around 1.4 billion pounds and a Danish criminal case involving about 9 billion Danish kroner. And here's the part that matters most for your viewer. When governments lose billions, that money does not vanish in some abstract accounting universe. It creates holes in budgets, holes in public services, holes that get covered by higher taxes, more debt, worse services, or some combination of all three. Corrective put it bluntly, money lost to Cum-Ex is money missing from things like kindergarten renovation and other public needs. That is why financial scandals matter, even if you never buy a stock in your life. Because when the system gets looted at the top, regular people pay at the bottom. A normal person hears this story and thinks, okay, but I'm not a banker, I'm not a trader, why should I care? Here's why. Because this scandal reveals a brutal truth about modern finance. There are two financial systems, one for normal people and one for people who can afford complexity. In the normal system, if you file your taxes wrong, the government comes after you. If you miss a payment, you get fees. If you make a mistake, you pay for it. But in the elite system, complexity can become a weapon. The more confusing the transaction, the easier it becomes to delay accountability, blur responsibility, and argue that nobody really knew what was happening. That's the real lesson of Cum-Ex. Not just that people stole money, but that they used the legitimacy of the financial system itself to do it. And that destroys trust. Because if the public thinks the system is strict only for ordinary people and flexible for insiders, they stop believing the rules are fair. And once people stop believing the rules are fair, institutions start to rot. So why didn't government stop this immediately? Part of the answer is that they tried, but too slowly. Innovation happens fast. Regulation happens slowly. Enforcement happens even slower. By the time governments fully understand the loophole, the money is already gone. That combination is lethal. There's also something psychological going on here. A scam like this survives because each participant can tell themselves a comforting story. The trader says, I'm just executing a strategy. The lawyer says, I'm just giving an opinion. The bank says, we rely on external advice. The investor says, I assumed it was legal. And when everyone hides inside their role, responsibility gets diluted. That is how giant white-collar crime works, not always through one dramatic mastermind, but through a chain of people, each doing one piece, each pretending their own part is too small to matter. But it does matter, because billions of euros were not lost by accident. Investigations found broad networks of professionals and institutions connected to the trades, not one isolated actor, and that's the scariest part of the story. The system didn't fail because nobody was smart enough, it failed because too many smart people found ways to profit from confusion. Now, if you're watching this from outside Europe, especially from the US, you might think, interesting story, but not my problem. That would be a mistake, because the exact tax structure may be European, but the underlying pattern is global. Whenever a financial system becomes too complex for ordinary people to understand, it creates an opening for insiders to extract value without public scrutiny. That pattern shows up everywhere. Tax shelters, aggressive financial engineering, hidden fees, regulatory arbitrage, products designed to look legal before they look moral. So even if Cum-Ex itself is a European scandal, the lesson is universal. Complexity protects insiders, and taxpayers usually find out last. That's why these stories matter. They are not just about one scam. They are about how modern finance can turn opacity into profit. So let's say this clearly. The Cum-Ex scandal was not just a tax trick, it was a test of whether modern states could defend public money against people with better lawyers, better networks, and more patience. And for years, they failed. That failure cost Europe billions. The original journalistic estimate was 55 billion euros, with later reporting around related schemes pushing that figure much higher. And every billion stolen from the public is a billion that does not go where ordinary people think their taxes are supposed to go. Not to schools, not to infrastructure, not to healthcare, not to public services. That's why this story matters. Because in the end, the biggest victims of elite financial fraud are usually not the people inside the trade. It's everyone outside it. If you want, the next video could be on Wells Fargo, buy now, pay later, or shrinkflation. Because once you understand Cum-Ex, you start seeing the same rule everywhere. When finance gets complicated enough, someone is usually getting rich off the confusion.